candles were still burning when my mother decided to bury me in front of everyone she knew. It was my 30th birthday. A private room at Aldo's, the good tablecloth, the whole family folded around one long table. My mother lifted her wine, gave the room the warm, generous smile she saves for an audience, and said, "It's time we were all honest. We adopted you for the tax break. You were never really one of us." My sister laughed out loud. My father stared at his plate and said nothing. And here is the part not one of them knew. In the inside pocket of my coat, folded inside a plain white envelope, I had carried a truth of my own into that room. 3 minutes later, the smiles were gone from every face at that table. Welcome back to Suspense Stories, where the daughter they called a project, a footnote, an asterisk on the family tree, turns out to be the one who'd been quietly holding the whole house up, the actual house, the one they were sitting in. If you have ever poured yourself out for people who could not say your name without a disclaimer, stay with me to the end. This one lands close to the bone. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and do me a favor and subscribe, because the part where the envelope opens is the part you'll want to be here for. Let me back up to earlier that evening, because the envelope is the whole story. I got to the restaurant 20 minutes early, the way I always do, because being early is the only way I have ever felt like I had any control over a room. I'm Nell Hargrove. I'm 30 years old, and I'm a title examiner in Granger. That's a fancy way of saying I spend my days down in the county records, reading the fine print everyone else skips, tracing a property back through every hand it ever passed through, and proving on paper, in ink, in a way no one can argue with, who actually owns what. People think a house belongs to whoever's living in it. I know better. A house belongs to whoever's name is on the deed that's filed at the courthouse. Those are not always the same people. Remember that. It matters tonight. I was wearing my good coat, and in the inside pocket was a plain white envelope I had been carrying for 3 days, working up the courage to use it. Inside that envelope was a gift, not a card, not a check, a signed, notarized transfer of title. I had decided, after a lot of nights staring at my ceiling, that on my 30th birthday, I would finally tell my parents a secret I'd kept for 5 years. And I'd tell it by handing them the deed to their own house, free and clear, paid off, as a present. I know how that sounds. I'll explain how a thing like that even becomes possible. But first, I need you to understand the shape of the evening I walked into, and what I was hoping it would be. I came to that dinner hoping that this would finally be the night I stopped being a guest in my own family and became one of them. I had practiced what I would say, something small. Happy birthday to me, and welcome home, all of us. I touched the envelope through the wool of my coat, and I felt, for about 4 seconds, almost brave. Then I hung the coat on the back of my chair, sat down at the head of a table full of people who shared a last name I was handed at 5 years old, and waited for the rest of them to arrive. I was 5 when the Renners adopted me. I don't remember much of the before. I remember the after. A clean bedroom that never quite felt like mine. A family photo on the staircase wall where I was always standing a half step to the side, like the photographer had to make room for someone who wasn't quite supposed to be in frame. They fed me, they clothed me, they sent me to school, and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that was nothing. It wasn't nothing, but there is a difference between being raised inside a house and being made part of a family. And I learned the size of that difference early. My sister, Whitney, 3 years older, theirs by blood, never once let me forget I was a project. My mother had a particular way of introducing me. "This is Nell. We adopted her. Never just my daughter. Always the footnote. Always the asterisk. The one person in that entire family who ever made me feel like I belonged was my grandmother. Grandma Margie, my father's mother. A small, sharp woman who smelled like lemon drops and a sewing machine, who did not suffer foolishness from anyone, including her own son. Margie had been a seamstress her whole life, alterations, wedding dresses, a quilting circle at the church that ran for 40 years. She used to say a person was like a quilt. You don't get to pick which scraps land in your lap. You just sew them in so the whole thing holds together and keeps somebody warm. She never once said the word adopted in front of me. She called me her granddaughter, flat, like a fact of weather. And she meant it all the way down when I was 9 and crying in her kitchen because Whitney had told me I was borrowed, that I'd have to be given back someday. Grandma Margie took my face in both her hands all rough at the fingertips from 60 years of needles, and she said, "You listen to me, Nell. You are the best thing that ever walked through this family's door. Don't you ever once let them tell you otherwise." Then she went to her sewing room and she started cutting squares, and over that whole winter, she made me a quilt out of scraps of every important dress she had ever sewn for this family. My mother's wedding gown, my aunt's, the christening dress Whitney had worn, and she stitched me right into the middle of it. "There," she said when she laid it over my bed. "Now you can't tell where you came from. You're just part of the pattern, same as everybody." She died when I was 22. I think about her every single day. So when you ask why a grown woman would secretly buy back her own family's home and never tell a soul, why I would spend 5 years quietly holding up people who held me at arm's length, the answer starts in a kitchen that smelled like lemon drops, with a woman who told me I belonged before anybody had given me a reason to doubt it. Hold onto Grandma Margie. She is not just the soft part of this story. By the end of the night, she turned out to be the strongest hand at that table, and she'd been dead for 8 years. 5 years ago, my parents almost lost everything, and I was the only one who saw it coming. My father, Dale, had poured most of their savings into a heating and cooling business that didn't survive a bad couple of winters, and a partner who walked off with the accounts. On top of that came the medical bills, my mother's knees first, then my mother's heart, a valve that needed work. The house I grew up in, the only home I had ever had, was sliding straight toward foreclosure. And they were far too proud to tell a living soul. I found out the way I find out most things in this life. Through the records. A house doesn't go under quietly. There are notices, there are filings, there's a lis pendens recorded at the courthouse, and a pre-foreclosure listing that anybody in my line of work would spot in a heartbeat. I was sitting at my desk on an ordinary Tuesday, running a routine search, and there it was. My childhood address. My grandmother's quilt was still on the bed in that house, and the whole thing was scheduled for the auction block in 3 weeks. I could have called them. I could have said, "Mom, Dad, I know, let me help." But I knew exactly how that phone call would go. My mother would sooner have laid down on the courthouse steps than take charity from the adopted one. She'd have turned it into a story. Nell thinks she's better than us. Nell wants to lord it over the family. Nell, with her lawyer money, rubbing our nose in it. Help offered out loud would have been help refused out loud, and then thrown back at me for a decade, so I made a different choice. The kind of choice you can only make if you understand the law well enough to stay completely invisible inside it. I decided I would save the house, and no one would ever know it was me. Here is how a person quietly buys back her own family's home, in case you ever find yourself needing to know. 2 years before all this, I'd set up a small property holding company, a single-member LLC, the ordinary kind people in real estate use to invest on the side. It had a name with no Renner anywhere in it. 2 bland words and the letters LLC. Fieldstone Holdings. When the auction came, my little company was the buyer. I emptied my savings into the down payment and took a mortgage in the company's name. And just like that, the house that was about to be sold out from under my parents belonged to a faceless little business that happened to be me. Then I did the part that still tightens my chest to remember. I had a property manager I trust, a quiet, decent man named Cliff, reach out to my parents on the company's behalf. He told them an investor had bought the home as a rental and wanted to keep good, stable tenants in place. He offered them a lease, $1 a year. I told Cliff to frame it as a tax thing, a write-off, paperwork the owner needed on the books. Something that wouldn't bruise my father's pride or trip my mother's suspicion. And my mother, the woman who would not have taken a dime from her adopted daughter, was delighted to take a nearly free house from a stranger who, she decided, simply admired their stability. She bragged about it. I heard her at Thanksgiving the year after telling my aunt, "We've got the most wonderful landlord. Barely charges us a thing. Just goes to show you live right, you work hard, things have a way of working out." I had to get up and go stand in the kitchen because I was the wonderful landlord. I was the thing that had worked out. And I couldn't say one word because the second I did, the gift would curdle into a debt, and my mother would never, ever forgive me for being the person who'd seen them at their lowest. So I smiled, and I refilled the gravy boat, and I kept my secret. A year after I bought the house, my mother's heart finally forced the issue. That valve needed surgery, a real one, the kind with a price tag that empties out what little a retired couple has left. Their insurance covered some of it. It did not cover nearly enough. I heard about it secondhand, through Whitney, who mostly called me to narrate how stressful the whole thing was for her, personally. The hospital wanted a large payment up front before they'd schedule it. And a heart that's waiting is a dangerous heart to have. So I did it again. I called the hospital's billing office. I gave them my mother's account number, and I paid the balance down to nothing, listed in their system only as a private benefactor. The surgery went ahead. My mother lived. The woman who would, 4 years later, raise a glass and call me a tax write-off in front of a dozen people. She was alive to do it because of a check I wrote and never signed my name to. She never once asked who paid. I've thought about that a lot. I think some part of her didn't want to know, because knowing would have meant owing. And my mother arranged her entire life so she would never owe the daughter she'd never quite claimed. Let me say something to you directly, because I have a feeling some of you have lived your own version of this. If you have ever spent yourself down to nothing for people who would never do the same for you, telling yourself that this time, this one gift, this one sacrifice, would finally be the thing that made them see you, I want you to stay with me all the way to the end of this. Because there is a difference between love and a toll you keep paying to cross a bridge that was never, ever going to let you across. Type the word roof in the comments if you already know exactly what I mean. I didn't understand it yet. I was still paying. I'd bought the house. I'd bought the heartbeat. And I'd told myself that someday they would understand what I'd done and it would finally matter. The thing that pushed me toward that envelope was one sentence, and I overheard it before the cruelty even officially began. I'd come back from hanging up my coat, and the early arrivals, my parents and my Aunt Pam, my mother's younger sister, were already holding court near the window. Aunt Pam was praising my parents for weathering the storm, for keeping their home through the hard years when so many people they knew had lost theirs. And my mother, glowing, lit up by the attention, said the line I'd heard 100 times. We did it all ourselves. Nobody handed us a thing. You just work hard and you live right and you keep what's yours. I stood there in my good coat, with the deed to that exact house folded over my heart, and I felt the old wound and a brand new feeling, both at once. The new feeling was simpler than anger. I was tired. I was so tired of being the invisible hand that kept this family afloat while they toasted themselves for swimming. And so I made a decision that I genuinely believed, in that moment, was the brave and loving one. Tonight, I decided, I would tell them. I would hand my parents the paid-off deed as a present, the gift of finally being known, and I would say it gently. It was me, all of it, because we're family, and that's what family does. I truly believed that handing them their house, mortgage gone, would be the exact moment the asterisk finally fell off my name. I sat down at that table with hope in my coat pocket. I need you to hold on to that I came to give them a house. When you see what they decided to do with the evening instead. The rest of the table filled in around me the way it always did. With me, as the still point, everyone arranged themselves around without ever quite including. Whitney arrived with her husband, Todd, a man whose entire personality is agreeing with whatever Whitney said most recently. She kissed the air beside my cheek and looked my coat up and down. Is that new? Looks expensive. Must be nice, lawyer money. She said the words like other people say stolen money. A couple of cousins drifted in. My cousin Kyle, who has never held a job past the first frost. An uncle. A family friend named Ray who'd known my parents 30 years. 11, maybe 12 of us, in that warm room with the candles my mother had insisted on. They sang to me. You'd think that would feel nice. But there's a particular loneliness in being sung happy birthday by people who can't quite hold your eyes while they do it. I sat with my hands in my lap and the envelope 2 feet away in my coat, and I smiled and thanked everyone. Whitney spent the first half hour narrating her own life, her kids, her kitchen renovation, the cruise she and Todd were planning. Every so often, she lobbed something across the table at me. Still single, Nell? Well, you work so much. I suppose somebody has to. Little cuts. The kind that don't draw blood one at a time, but leave you tender all over by the end of the night. And my mother watched it the way you'd watch a favorite show, with the satisfied air of a woman whose real daughter was performing exactly as written. And I told myself, the way I always did, just get through the dinner. Get to the cake. Then you'll hand them the deed, and all of this, all these years of small cruelties, will reframe itself into something you can finally forgive. I had no idea my mother was about to hand me a brand new frame for the whole picture. Somewhere around the main course, my mother started in on the adoption story. She does this at gatherings, once she's a glass and a half into the wine and wants to be seen as generous. It's a performance she has given my entire life, and I could recite it in my sleep. How they hadn't planned on a third child. How they took me in during a hard season. How it was the decent thing, the Christian thing, the difficult but rewarding thing. She always tells it like I'm a stray she found shivering in the rain, and she always tells it while I'm sitting right there, as though my feelings are a piece of furniture in the story, instead of its subject. We did a good thing taking her in, she said to the table, patting Aunt Pam's wrist. Not everyone would have. People really don't understand what it costs to raise a child that isn't your own. That isn't your own. The cousins shifted in their chairs. Ray, the family friend, gave me a small, sorry wince, the kind people offer when they feel bad, but not bad enough to actually say anything. And I felt the hope in my coat pocket flicker, because this was not the warm, soft table I'd pictured when I rehearsed my little speech. This was a table being carefully prepared by my own mother to see me as a debt the family had generously absorbed. I remember thinking very clearly, maybe not tonight. Maybe I fold the deed back up and I try again next year when she's in a better mood, when the room is kinder. I actually reached toward my coat. Then I made myself stop. I told myself to wait, to read the room, to see if it warmed back up. It did not warm back up. It was about to get very, very cold. My sister has never been able to hold a glass of wine and a secret at the same time. While my mother basked, Whitney leaned toward Todd, but pitched it loud enough for half the table, the way she does when she wants to wound while pretending to whisper. "It's just funny," she said. "Miss Big Shot title lady, and meanwhile Mom and Dad nearly lost the house, and she barely lifted a finger to help. There it was, almost lost the house. So Whitney knew about the foreclosure, or some piece of it." I kept my face perfectly still, the face I wear across a closing table when somebody's just laid down a card they didn't mean to show. "I helped where I could," I said evenly. Whitney snorted. "Right, a birthday card and some advice." She had no idea. None of them did. To Whitney, the whole story was that the worthless adopted sister had stood around uselessly, while our heroic parents hauled themselves out of the fire by their own bootstraps. The idea that the house had been saved by anyone but their own grit had simply never occurred to her, because the alternative, that it was me, was unthinkable inside the family religion. And in that moment, I understood something about Whitney that almost made me feel sorry for her. She needed me to be the failure. Her entire sense of rank in this family depended on there being one person beneath her, and I was the person. If it ever got out that the broke, borrowed, useless sister was the one holding the roof over all their heads, Whitney's whole map of the world would have to be torn up and drawn again. So she mocked me loudly on my birthday to keep the map intact. I sipped my water and said nothing. The envelope sat in my coat like a stone, and across the table, my father would not lift his eyes to meet mine. "I need you to understand exactly what was in that envelope, because it is the hinge the entire night turns on." It was a quitclaim deed, drawn up properly, signed and notarized, transferring full ownership of the house from Fieldstone Holdings to Dale and Carol Renner, my parents, for the sum of $1 and natural love and affection. That's a real phrase we use in this work, natural love and affection. And I had typed it myself and felt my throat go tight when I did. I'd tucked something else in behind it, too, an old card. Grandma Margie's last birthday card to me, the one she gave me the year before she died, with her handwriting gone shaky, but still hers. I'd brought it for courage. I planned to read her words out loud when I handed over the deed, to explain why I'd done all of this, why I'd kept this family's home alive in the dark for 5 years. So I had built the most generous moment of my entire life and folded it into a plain white envelope. And as the dinner curdled, I sat there and argued with myself. Part of me, the part that had spent 25 years learning to read this exact room, was sending up flares. Don't do it. Not tonight. They are sharpening knives. Take the deed and Grandma's card and walk out with your hopes still intact. But the other part, the stubborn, hoping part, kept whispering. Maybe this is precisely when they need to know. Maybe generosity is the thing that finally breaks the spell. I have spent my whole career telling people to protect themselves, to never sign a single thing from a place of pure feeling. And there I sat, ignoring my own advice, because some lessons you only learn when the people you love most decide to teach them to you in front of an audience. I left the envelope where it was, and I waited. Aunt Pam is my mother's echo, 3 years younger and twice as eager to please her. So when the table seemed to need someone to twist the knife a little deeper, Aunt Pam was happy to volunteer. "You know what they say," she announced, swirling her wine. "Blood is blood. You can love a child you take in, of course you can, but it isn't the same. It can't be. There's a bond there that you just cannot manufacture." She smiled at me as she said it. A sugary, folk wisdom smile, as if she were sharing a recipe instead of telling a 30-year-old woman she was counterfeit at her own birthday dinner. A couple of people gave the uncomfortable chuckle of folks who don't agree but won't object. Todd nodded along, sagely, because Whitney had nodded first. And my mother looked pleased. That's the detail I keep coming back to. Her own sister had just called me a thing that can't be manufactured, a fake, and my mother looked pleased. Like the table was finally getting me arranged in my proper place, and something settled in my chest then, cold and final. The hope wasn't flickering anymore. It was going out, and in its place came a clarity I hadn't allowed myself in 25 years. These were not people who had simply never gotten around to loving me. These were people who had decided, a long time ago, that I was a line item. A good deed they'd done, a write-off, though I did not yet know my mother was about to use that exact word. Through all of it, my father said nothing, and his silence had its own volume. Dale Renner is not cruel the way my mother is cruel. He's a coward, which I've come to believe is just a quieter species of the same thing. All night he'd been studying his plate, his wine, the candle flame, anything but me. And I started to notice that underneath the avoiding there was something else. Not just discomfort, fear. Every time the talk drifted near the house, near money, near the hard years, my father flinched like a man bracing for a door he thought he'd nailed shut. And I realized, with the slow certainty of a column of figures finally adding up, that my father knew. Not everything, maybe, but something. He had signed that $1 lease. He had watched a heart surgery get paid down to zero by a benefactor nobody could name. Somewhere in him, my careful, frightened father had done the same math I'd spent 5 years hiding, and he had chosen, every single day since, to say nothing, to let his wife call me a charity case, while he sat on the knowledge that the charity ran the other direction. When his eyes finally flicked up and caught mine, just for a second, I saw it confirmed. Guilt, naked and miserable. He looked away first, and that, more than my mother's performance, more than Whitney's sniping, more than Aunt Pam's poison, was the thing that straightened my spine. Because I could forgive cruelty that came from not knowing. What I could not sit quietly through was a man who knew exactly what I had done for this family and let me be humiliated for sport rather than risk one bad evening with his wife. Before the cake came out, I excused myself, and I took my coat with me to the restroom, which probably looked strange. But I needed 1 minute alone with the envelope. I stood at the sink and I opened it. The deed was there, crisp and official, my signature and the notary's seal, my parents' names typed on the line for the new owners. $1 and natural love and affection. I read those words again and felt how naive they'd been just an hour before. And tucked behind the deed was Grandma Margie's card. I opened it the way I've opened it 100 times since she died, and I read her handwriting. Happy birthday to my granddaughter. You were the best thing that ever walked through this family's door, and I'd sew you into the middle of us again 1,000 times over. Don't let a single one of them tell you otherwise. All my love, Always Grandma. I stood in that restroom, and I let myself feel the whole thing for 1 full minute. The little girl a half step to the side in the staircase photo. The wonderful landlord nobody knew. The benefactor who paid for a heart and got mocked for sending a card. And my grandmother's voice, reaching across 8 years and a sheet of cardstock to tell me what my own mother never would. You belong. You always did. You're part of the pattern. And standing there, I made the decision that turned a gift into a reckoning. I was not going to hand my parents this deed as a present. They had not earned a present. They had spent the entire evening proving they never intended to. But the truth folded into this envelope was still going on that table tonight. Not as a gift, as a fact. As the one thing in that room that did not care in the slightest how my mother felt about bloodlines. I slid Grandma's card into the breast pocket of my dress, kept the deed, and the rest in the envelope, and I walked back toward the room with my heart absolutely steady. The cake was waiting. So was my mother's big announcement. When I came back, the cake was on the table, 30 candles lit, and my mother was visibly waiting for me. She had the look she gets when she's decided something is going to happen, and the rest of us are just here to witness it. She let me sit. She let the candles burn down a little. Then she picked up her spoon and tapped it 3 bright times against her wine glass and pulled every face in the room toward her. Before we do the cake, she said, I'd like to say a few words. It is a special birthday, after all. 30 years. She smiled around the table, soaking up the attention, and I felt the room settle into the hush families fall into when the matriarch decides to make a speech. Whitney was already grinning, like she knew what was coming, or at least knew it would be good for her and bad for me, which to Whitney amount to the same thing. Aunt Pam folded her hands. Todd got out his phone and started recording, because of course he did. My father set his fork down very carefully, and I watched his shoulders climb toward his ears. I sat with the envelope in my lap now, under the table, my fingers resting flat on it. And even then, even after everything that evening had already shown me, some small, stupid animal part of me hoped. One last flare of it. Maybe 30 was the number that softened her. Maybe she was about to say something true and warm, and I could quietly put the envelope away, and we could start the whole thing over. I have always been a fool for this family. One last time, I let myself hope. Then my mother smiled wider, lifted her glass toward me, and opened her mouth. Now that Nell is 30, she began, I think it's finally time we were all honest with one another. We're family, and families should tell each other the truth. She said the word family like she held the deed to it. A few people chuckled, expecting a roast. One of those toasts where an embarrassing childhood story gets aired for laughs. I felt the table relax into that expectation. I almost relaxed into it myself. But my mother's eyes, when they landed on me, were not the eyes of a woman about to tell a funny story. They were cool and bright and certain, the eyes of someone who has waited a long time to say a thing out loud and has finally decided the moment belongs to her. The truth, she went on, is that people have always wondered why we did it. Why we took in a little girl who wasn't ours all those years ago, when money was tight and times were hard. She paused for effect. My father said, Carol, very low, a warning under his breath. She rolled straight over it without so much as a glance. Whitney leaned in. Todd's phone was up. Aunt Pam wore the expectant little smile of a woman settling in for her favorite program. And I sat there, 30 years old, with the deed to my mother's house resting in my lap, and I understood that whatever came out of her mouth next was going to be the truest thing she had ever said to me in public. And that it was going to be cruel. Because for my mother, the truth was only ever a tool for putting me back in my place. "We adopted you," my mother said, smiling right at me, raising her glass like a toast. "For the tax break, you were never really one of us." The room went silent, not a polite silence, the other kind. The kind where a sentence lands so wrong that everyone's body knows it before their manners can catch up. And into that silence, my sister Whitney laughed, out loud, a real laugh, delighted. Like our mother had just delivered the punchline she'd been waiting 30 years to hear. Todd's phone kept recording. Aunt Pam pressed her napkin to her lips, hiding a smirk. One of the cousins made a small sound, a wince that got loose, and my father closed his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. He just closed his eyes, the way a man does when he can't stop a wreck and decides not to watch it happen. For the tax break, I'm not going to lie to you and say it didn't hurt. It hurt the way only the oldest wound can hurt, the one you've spent your whole life carefully, never pressing on. 30 years of being the footnote, the project, the borrowed one, distilled down into a single smiling sentence at a candlelit table. With my sister laughing and my father's eyes shut, and my mother's glass still raised in the air. But here is the thing my mother never understood about the woman she'd spent 30 years underestimating. I don't fall apart when I'm hit. I go very, very calm. It's the thing that makes me good at my job. The worse the news across the table, the steadier my hands get. And as that cruel sentence finished landing, I felt my hands settle, perfectly still, in my lap, resting on a white envelope that had just changed its entire purpose. I did not react the way they expected. They wanted tears, I think, a scene, the adopted daughter fleeing the restaurant in tears, proving once, and for all that she was too sensitive, too dramatic, never really one of them. That was the script. Nell overreacts. Nell makes everything about herself. Nell just can't take a joke, so I gave them the opposite. I sat perfectly still, and I let the silence stretch, and I watched what the table did with it. Because a cruel thing said out loud is only powerful for as long as nobody looks straight at it. The longer I sat there, calm and unbroken, the more the room had to actually sit with what my mother had said. Whitney's laugh died in her throat when no one joined it. Aunt Pam's smirk faltered. Ray, the family friend, was staring at my mother now with something close to alarm. And my mother's triumphant smile began, just slightly, to curdle. Because the reaction she'd been performing for was not arriving. If you've made it this far with me, you already know I didn't run. Comment whose name is on IT if you've ever had to keep your face still while someone smaller than you tried to make you the small one. Subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories, because what I laid on that tablecloth next is the part they'll be retelling at family gatherings for the rest of their lives. Let me show you what I did. I picked up my napkin, dabbed my mouth, set it back down, and I stood up. The candles were still burning, all 30 of them. I looked around the table at the people who shared my name, and I felt something I had never once felt at a family gathering in my whole life. I felt powerful, not angry, powerful, because I was the only person in that room who knew what was about to be set down on the tablecloth. And I knew, the way I know a clean chain of title, that it was going to change everything. I want to be honest about the choice I made standing there, because the other choice would have been easy and maybe even wiser. I could have walked. I could have picked up my coat and said something quiet and dignified. I hope the cake is good, and left that restaurant forever, taking my secret and my deed and my grandmother's card with me. Walking away is its own kind of victory. There's a version of this story where I never say a word, where I just stop paying. Let the $1 lease lapse, and let my parents learn the truth months later in the cold language of a notice from a holding company. It would have been quieter. It would have been safer, but I thought about Grandma Margie's card against my chest. Don't let a single one of them tell you otherwise. And I understood that walking out in silence would be letting them tell me otherwise, one last time, forever. It would mean my mother's sentence got to be the last word. It would mean the truth of who I'd actually been to this family, not a tax break, not a charity case, but the hand that held the roof up would stay buried, so my mother's pride could keep its furniture arranged just so. I was done arranging myself around their comfort. I'd spent 25 years being small so they could feel large, and 5 years being invisible so they could feel self-made. Not tonight. Tonight, the truth was getting a chair at this table, whether anybody liked it or not. So I did not walk. I stood up straighter. I held the envelope where they could all see it, and I looked at my mother, still holding her glass, and I gave her the only thing she'd actually earned: honesty. You said you adopted me for the tax break, I said. My voice came out level, almost gentle, which made the whole table lean in. I want to start right there, Mom, because it's a strange thing for you, of all people, to say. I let that sit a beat. There's no such thing as an ongoing tax break for adopting a child. There's a one-time adoption credit. You'd have claimed it the year my adoption was finalized, 25 years ago. Maybe a few $1,000s, and only if your income that year qualified. Once, a quarter of a century ago. I watched the words land on the cousins, on Ray, on the people who'd half believed there was some clever financial logic underneath the cruelty. So if you really took me in for the money, I went on, you made a terrible investment. A child costs a great deal more than a one-time credit to raise, and you've spent 25 years reminding everyone what a sacrifice it was. The math doesn't work, Mom. It never worked, which tells me you didn't actually do it for the tax break at all. I paused. You just like saying it, because it's a way to tell me in front of people on my birthday that I was a transaction. My mother's mouth opened and closed. She had expected tears, and instead she was being corrected calmly on the facts by a daughter she'd refused to claim. Nell, don't, Whitney said, but I wasn't looking at Whitney. I set my hand flat on the envelope. You wanted to talk about the truth tonight, I said, so let's. I brought some of my own. Let me ask you something, Mom, since we're being so honest in front of everyone. I kept my tone mild, the tone I use when I already know the answer and just want it said out loud, on the record. Who do you think owns your house? She blinked. It was such an odd question, sliding in sideways after everything else, that for a second she couldn't find a place to put it. What kind of question is that? We do, we own it. We kept that house through the worst years of our lives, through hard work, no thanks to, she caught herself, glanced at me, and recalibrated, no thanks to anybody. You kept it through hard work, I repeated. That's the story. The one you told Aunt Pam an hour ago. Nobody handed you a thing. Across the table, my father made a sound. Not a word, a kind of strangled exhale, the noise a man makes watching a wave he knows he can't outrun. His face had gone the gray of the tablecloth, because Dale Renner knew exactly where this was going, even if no one else in the room did. Carol, he said, hoarse. Carol, maybe we don't. It was me, I said, before he could finish, before my mother could ask, and I reached into the envelope, and I laid the deed on the table, face up, in the candlelight, where everyone could read the name. All of it. It's been me the whole time. I stood at the head of the table, and I laid the truth out the way I'd lay out an exhibit. One document at a time. Calm, clear, letting each one settle before I reached for the next. This, I said, sliding the deed to the center, where the candlelight caught it, is the title to the house my parents live in. The house Mom says they kept through hard work. Read the owner. Heads bent toward it. I watched Ray read it. Watched a cousin's lips move silently around the words. The owner of record was a holding company. And clipped behind it, in the little stack of documents I'd brought, was the operating agreement with my own name on it. 5 years ago, that house went into foreclosure, I said. My parents were 3 weeks from losing it. I found out the way I find out everything through the county records. And I bought it, quietly, through my company, at the auction, with my savings and a mortgage in my name. Then I leased it back to them for $1 a year and let them believe a kind stranger had done it, because I knew my mother would sooner lose the house than take a thing from me. Nobody moved. The candles guttered. I've paid the property taxes on that house for 5 years, I said, and laid the records down, neat copies, one for each year. Here, every receipt, then the next. This is a statement from the hospital 4 years ago. When Mom needed her heart surgery and the money wasn't there, a private benefactor paid the balance so it could go ahead. I set it gently on the tablecloth. That benefactor was me. Mom is sitting at this table tonight, well enough to tell a room full of people I was a tax write-off because of a check I wrote and never put my name on. I looked at my mother. She had gone completely still, the wine glass frozen halfway down to the table, staring at a tablecloth that was now covered in proof. "You're lying," she said, and her voice came out thin and high, nothing like the warm performer from 20 minutes before. "This is some kind of trick. Dale, tell her to stop." But Dale couldn't tell me to stop. Dale had put his face in his hands and his shoulders were shaking, and when he finally lowered them, he was openly weeping. The cowardice had cracked all the way through at last. "You knew," I said to him, not a question. "Didn't you, Dad? How long?" 2 years, he whispered, to the candles, to his wife, to the whole table. "I figured it out about 2 years ago. The lease, the hospital. I didn't know how to tell her. I didn't know how to tell you that I knew and that I'd let all of it." He couldn't finish. "I'm sorry, Nell. God, I'm sorry." "Tell me what?" my mother demanded, looking between us. But it was already dawning on her in pieces, the way a foreclosure dawns on people, one notice at a time. The wonderful landlord, the benefactor, the $1 lease, the daughter with the steady job and the good coat and the lawyer money. Her eyes went from my father to the documents to me. And for the first time in 30 years, my mother looked at me like she had absolutely no idea who I was. That's when I gave them the last thing in the envelope, and it was the thing that flattened the room. "There's one more piece of this you should hear," I said, "and then I'll let you eat your cake." I reached in and drew out a folded sheet, old, soft at the creases, and a single page of records behind it. When I bought that house, I had to pull the whole chain of title first. It's what I do. And when I did, I found something I wasn't looking for. A small payable on death account set up years ago, funded quietly, a little at a time, by Grandma Margie. My father's head came up. "She named one beneficiary," I said. "Me, by my full name, Nell, not the adopted one. Nell Renner, it says, and then she'd added in her own hand Hargrove after I changed it back." My voice held, but it took something. Grandma Margie left me money, and there was a note with it, dated the year before she died. She knew, somehow, she always knew, that this family would land in trouble, and that I'd be the one fool enough to try to fix it. The note says, "Use it to take care of them if it comes to that. But Nell, don't you ever let them make you earn a seat at a table you already paid for." I laid Grandma's note in the center, beside the deed. "That account is the down payment," I said. "That's how I bought the house. So when I tell you I kept this family's home alive, understand what I'm really telling you. Your mother did, Margie did. A woman who'd been dead 3 years bought back this house through me because she's the only one who ever looked at me and saw family instead of arithmetic. I looked straight at my mother. You want to talk about who really paid for what, Mom? You once took her money to raise me, and you spent my whole childhood telling everyone what a burden I was. And then she reached out of her own grave and saved the roof over your head. That's the bond your sister says can't be manufactured. It's been holding this house up the whole time. Aunt Pam had gone gray. Whitney had both hands pressed over her mouth. Todd's phone was lying face down on the table now, forgotten. You called me a tax write-off, I said, and my voice finally dropped, soft and even and final. But you have been living under my roof for 5 years. Every night you've slept in a house I saved. Every time you told someone you kept it through hard work, you were standing inside a gift you didn't know you'd been given by me and by a dead woman who loved me more than you ever managed to. You said I was never one of you. I picked up the deed. Funny, mine's the only name on the door. My mother made one last grab at the power that had always worked before. She drew herself up and reached for her oldest weapon, making me the problem. You've been spying on us, sneaking around, buying up our home behind our backs, sitting on it for years just to humiliate us in public. This is sick, Nell. This is exactly the kind of stop. I didn't raise my voice. I just said it. One word, flat. And it cut clean through hers because the whole table was already with me. She stopped. I didn't buy that house to humiliate you, I said. I bought it so you'd have somewhere to live. I came here tonight to hand it to you, free and clear, as a present. I had a whole speech. I was going to tell you it came with all my love and that I just wanted, finally, to belong to you. I let them see the envelope, empty now. And you used my 30th birthday to tell a room full of people I was a write-off. So no, you won't be getting the house as a gift, not after tonight. The truth came to dinner, Mom, exactly like you wanted. I hope it was worth the wine. And my mother, who had never once in 30 years been at a loss in front of an audience, opened her mouth and found there was nothing left in it. Then the room came apart, the way these rooms always do once the calm one has finished. My mother came roaring back to life all at once, shoving her chair back, her face gone blotchy red. How dare you? After everything we gave you, the home, the food, the schooling, you do this. You ambush us. You turn my own family against me at a dinner table. She was nearly shrieking, pointing, the warm matriarch gone completely. That house is ours. You can't just, Dale, say something. Tell her. Aunt Pam jumped in, shrill. This is disgraceful, airing all of this in public. As if the public airing hadn't started with her own sister calling me counterfeit 20 minutes before. And here is what I want you to notice, because it's the whole reason it worked. I didn't shout back. I stood there, perfectly still, my hands quiet at my sides, and I let them be as loud and as ugly as they wanted to be. Because the documents were already on the table, and the documents didn't need a raised voice. The louder my mother got screaming about a house, in front of the proof that it was mine, the worse she looked. Todd had quietly pulled Whitney's chair back from the table, distancing them both. And Ray, the family friend, stood up, set his napkin down, and said to my mother in a voice full of quiet disgust, "Carol, that girl saved your life. She saved your home, and she paid for the surgery that's keeping your heart going. And that's the thing you chose to say to her tonight." He looked at me. "I'm sorry, Nell. I should have spoken up an hour ago. We all should have." And one by one, that's what the table did. They turned. Not toward the screaming woman defending a house that wasn't hers, toward the quiet one who'd been carrying them all along. I did not burn their lives to the ground. I want to be clear about that, because revenge stories sometimes end with someone tossed out into the street, and that was never who I wanted to become. The morning after, I had a colleague, because I wasn't going to be my own family's lawyer, send my parents a formal, fair letter. They could stay in the house, but on an honest, market-rate lease, with a reasonable amount of time to either sign it or make other arrangements. No more $1 fiction. No more invisible benefactor. Just the truth in writing, the way every part of it should have been from the start. I kept the deed. The gift was off the table for good. My father called me a week later. And for the first time in my life, he said the words out loud that he knew what I'd done, that he'd known for 2 years, that his silence was the worst thing he had ever done in his life, and that he'd carry it to his grave. I let him say it. I didn't rush in to comfort him. Some apologies a person has to feel all the way through. We talk now, carefully. He's doing the work. We'll see. Whitney texted, then called. She apologized for the laugh and for the years of it, and to her credit, she didn't ask me for a single thing. She told me she'd thought about Grandma Margie's quilt, the one stitched out of all our dresses, and that she finally understood what the old woman had been trying to say with it her whole life. We're learning a new language, Whitney and I. Slowly. One careful word at a time. My mother has never apologized. I don't expect she ever will. It isn't in her vocabulary. Aunt Pam tells anyone who will sit still that I tore the family apart, though fewer and fewer people seem to be sitting still for her these days. Because the recording Todd made, somehow it traveled the whole extended family. Everyone heard my mother say it. Everyone heard what I'd actually done. The story she had controlled for 30 years got rewritten in a single night. And this time, it got told true. There was one more thing. 2 weeks after the dinner, a woman named Edith, Grandma Margie's oldest friend from the quilting circle, 81 now, called and asked me to coffee. She'd heard. She took my hand across the table and she said, "Honey, I was there the week they brought you home. And I'll tell you something Margie made me promise to tell you if she didn't get to. They didn't choose you. Margie did. She's the one who found you. She's the one who pushed and pushed until they said yes. And she's the one who handed your father money to make it easy, money he was supposed to spend on you." Edith squeezed my fingers. You were never the burden they took on. You were the gift she gave them. And they were too proud to ever see it. I went home to my apartment in Granger, and I hung Grandma Margie's framed card on the wall where I'd see it every single morning. And I laid her quilt, the one with all of us sewn into it, the one I went back to that house and took before the lease was even signed, across the foot of my own bed. My door is open now. To my father slowly, as long as he keeps doing the work. To Whitney, carefully. It is closed to anyone who needs me to keep earning a seat I should have been handed for free. I stopped paying the toll on that bridge. I still don't know whether my mother ever loved me, and I've finally made my peace with the fact that it was never my job to prove I was worth it. Family isn't the blood you happen to be born into. It's the people who would never once make you prove you belong. Grandma Margie knew that. She sewed it into a quilt, and she signed it into an account, and she said it to a crying 9-year-old in a kitchen that smelled like lemon drops. And she turned out to be right about all of it. So that's how a birthday dinner taught my family whose name was really on the door. The envelope, the deed, the note from a woman who paid for my seat at the table before any of them ever thought to. If there's someone in your life who keeps making you earn a place you already bought and paid for, do me one favor. Go find out whose name is really on it. You may be carrying a great deal more than they will ever admit. If this one reached you, leave a comment and tell me, type roof, if you've ever been the one quietly holding it up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories, because there's another one coming, and the quiet ones always have the longest receipts.